Good evening, Demon fans, and welcome back to the Demonland podcast. My name is Andy, and well, the D's blitzed their way back to top spot, albeit for a temporary visit that was cruelly snatched away in the dying seconds of the final match of the round. That brief taste of life back at the top of the table reignited my hunger, and hopefully it's not too long until we can reach those dizzying heights once again. George is on sabbatical for a few weeks, so joining me solo tonight is our resident tactician and eternal optimist, Bin Man. Good evening, Bin Man.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening, Demonlanders. And, given George loves to talk so much, the show will probably be a bit shorter tonight. George, if you're listening, that was a joke at my expense, not yours. What fantastic day to be a Demon fan. What a fantastic day to be a Demon fan, huh? Never in doubt. Kozzy is ours.
Well, it was a little bit in doubt, and I'll just read out. I'll read it now because we did have someone ask about Kozzy. They sent in. We had Donna from our Facebook page write in and says, "Love the podcast. I have a long commute to work and you guys make the drive just fly by. How awesome is the news that Kozzy just re-signed for 4 years?" Well, thanks, Donna. We love the feedback. Keep the feedback coming. We do love to hear it. This was the news that every Demon fan has been waiting to hear, and I will admit that the longer this went on, I was starting to get Luke Jackson 2022 vibes. I know, B-Man, you said it was never in doubt, but I really thought that the more drawn out the negotiations were going to take, the less likely it would be that Kozzy would re-sign with the D's. And the fact that Port didn't have the draft currency this year made me all the more worried that we would get Jacksoned once again. And it turns out that those fears were totally unfounded, and when coupled with Freo's nosedive down the ladder so far this season, everything is coming up the Demons. So I guess out of our 2019 draft haul, we lost our pick, our number 3 pick. We're set to gain Freo's first and second round picks this year. And, with today's news of Kozzy's re-signing for 4 years, he joins Trent Rivers from that 2019 draft to be at the Demons until 2027. I'm so stoked about the re-signing. It's probably impossible to put a monetary figure on the importance of a player like Kozzy, not just on the field with some of the incredible things that he can do, but off the field. Every kid at every clinic or training session or family day, they all want a piece of Kozzy. There's so many kids with number 36 on their back from a marketing perspective, from a recognition perspective in the wider footy community. It's priceless. And if we had lost him, the picks just wouldn't adequately compensate us for what a special player that we already have. Players that tick all those boxes don't come around all that often. So thank you, Kozzy. Thank you, Tim Land. Thank you, Jason Taylor. Thank you, MFC. Big man, you must be wrapped with that news as well.
Oh, absolutely. It's ridiculous how happy I was about it today. Just absolutely ridiculous. And given we're talking about now, we'll just quickly do the Kozzy chat before you do the wrap up of the game. But a couple of things, 3 things came to mind. We talked about last year around Jackson leaving, is that I swore to myself after being absolutely devastated when Gerard Healy left the D's to go to Sydney. I was devastated, and afterwards I thought to myself, that's ridiculous. I don't want to be in that situation again where I care so much about a player leaving, and generally I've been relatively successful at sort of keeping that at bay, that sense of frustration, and when you lose a player. The closest I've got to really getting wound up since then was my one of my all-time favourites, right up there in the Wiz, leaving, and I didn't begrudge him at all for leaving, going back home, and that was one of those classic situations of doing it for family reasons. But Kozzy's just. He's already one of my all-time favourite players, and as I said, probably the only one ahead of him for me, just in terms of watching him play, just loving watching him play footy, is the Wiz. And I reckon now that Kozzy's a D moving forward, I'm sure in time I won't be able to split the Wiz in him, because he's just a phenomenal talent. But as I said, leaving all of that side, is just fantastic fun to watch play. And it's a huge tick, I reckon, for the footy club, how they've managed the situation. And, if you think about all of the other recent, over the last 2 or 3 years, the big contract negotiations, including Jackson's, which, as it turns out, the idea of being Jacksoned is now a positive thing. I've been Jacksoned. I've ended up with a top 10 draft pick and a second rounder, an early second rounder, and a pick 13 from this year. And, if that's being Jacksoned, I wouldn't mind being Jackson. So, but they've not only locked away our best players, but our heart and soul players. So the Salem, Maxi, Track, Oliver, Gus, Lever, Pets, Nibbler, Viney, May, Fritter, and now Kozzy are all locked in. I'm not quite sure where Langers is at, but I'm expecting.
I'll go through that in a sec.
Yeah, right. Okay, and then you add Rivers, McVie, Sparrow, all recently signing again, and then Grundy and Hunter being in the first year of multi-year contracts. And you can just see what a fantastic shape list-wise we're in, but more from a point of view of that heart and soul stuff. It's just so incredible, and I really think big pat on the back, and a huge congratulations to the off-field team. As you mentioned, Tim Lamb, but also everyone involved in the back. The off-field team, and it's just a reminder. That really sustainable on-field success is just simply not possible without quality governance and management systems. And, really, I'd have to say the defining feature of our governance and management system for 95% of the time I've followed the Ds through the 70s and 80s and the 90s was woeful. It was such, that maxim of get it right off field and it'll get right on field. The opposite is true in my experience. And just the other thing that I think that's a really big tick for the club is, that Kozzy was quoted as saying, "The club has embraced me and my family. I can't thank them enough for their support. Everything I do is to make my family proud, and the respect and understanding my teammates and coaches have shown us mean a lot." And I presume he means shown when he says us, he means his family. And so I think it's a really big tick of how they've handled that. It's not only is it professional, but it's culturally appropriate to involve Aboriginal players' families in such discussions and processes, assuming, of course, that it's okay with the player and that they've ticked it off. It's just good cultural practice to involve families in any sort of situations like that, or negotiations, or anything that's as meaningful as that decision was in Kozzy's life. So that's a huge tick for the club. We've got a reconciliation action plan, Innovate Reconciliation Plan at the club, and that sort of action activity is embedded in RAP's reconciliation action plan. So I think that's terrific. But it also, I think the other positive is that it builds on that culture that Jets left us with around supporting Aboriginal players and creating a culture where other Aboriginal players feel comfortable coming to. Of course, that's culturally important, but it's also got a practical positive outcome. And Kozzy, if he follows Jet's trajectory around leadership, I could see him becoming, a star for Melbourne. But as he gets older and more mature and more comfortable, he'll do what so many young Aboriginal men do, and become leaders and make it easier for young Aboriginal players coming into the club. So I just cannot begin to say how happy I was today when that all came together. So well done to the club, well done to Kozzy. And the other thing that I just wanted to say about Kozzy, you touched on it about the future, and I was just reading Demonland, and so just bear with me for a sec while I find it. And for me, I'm excited, but this is where the future of a footy club is built in these sorts of things going forward, and this is why it is important. Just 3 quotes from Demonland. There's a thread, as you can imagine. The thread's, what's the thread called again? It's the
it was the Kozzy, please resign us, Kozzy. Something about Kozzy resign, but now it's just Kozzy.
The name is now it's Kozzy. Yeah, resigns for 4 years. So there's a poster on Demonland called Coach, and he posted a couple of hours back, "My 9-year-old daughter ran around the living room doing the Kozzy celebration when she heard the news," with a big smiling face. And then someone else followed up with a is it Detox followed up with a post. So it's just on the second page. So I've got to flick through.
Well, while you're looking at that, I know I haven't spoken to my sister who does listen to the show. Shout out to him. But her boys would have been going absolutely nuts. So I'll follow up on that. But yeah, you hear those stories all over.
Absolutely. And Detox wrote an hour or so ago, great news for the adults. It's great to have one of our most skillful and highest potential players resign. Absolutely it is. For kids, I dreaded the thought of having to explain to my 7-year-old that his favourite player wouldn't be continuing with the D's. He was jumping around the kitchen today with a Nerf football saying, Kozzy from the impossible angle puts it through. And then Dazzle Davey, a regular poster, a long-time poster on Demonland, followed up a little while later with, my son is stoked, runs around the backyard calling his name, reminds me so much of myself when I was doing the exact same thing, calling Jeff Farmer's name. And I just thought those posts for me partly captured my excitement, being, like that kid-like excitement of something like this. But also that's the future, isn't it? Like 6, 7, 9-year-olds running around the kitchen, kicking the footy or the Nerf ball or a ball of socks or whatever it might be, going Kozzy. They're the future members. They're that's our future.
That's why I said it's priceless. Signings like that are priceless. The price tag of whatever they're paying here, it's not comparable. It doesn't. Any draft picks you get for that can't replace exactly what you just read. Can't replace the kid running around because draft picks. Who knows who it could be. And sure, you could get a star out of it, but how often do stars like that, where kids are running around their backyard, their kitchens, their living rooms, climbing, doing speckies on sofas, and couches like my mum used to scream at me and to stop doing. You can't buy that type of thing. It's just incredible.
And just on a practical level, leaving aside all of that, which is that's just brilliant, is that small forward, high pressure player who can move between the midfield, half forward flank and deep as a crumbing forward has been talked quite a lot about, as I think Corns has talked about. Is the I laugh about him because he's been, he was all over Kozzy going, is like becoming one of the most important positions on the field, but it's also a position that's a bit like a true full forward in some respects, is that not everyone can do it. You need to have goal sense. You need to have an ability to evade. It's one of those positions that you can't really, become one unless you've got the skill sets. And so we've got that player. And it's just such a, with forward half pressure being such a critical component now of footy, to have him and a goal kicker and someone who can push into the midfield is incredible. And watching the clips today on, of his career, it's amazing to see his physique's changed. He looks like a little brick at the moment. He's so muscly and, he's so strong in his chest. So, and you can see it, that they're really struggling to drag him down. So, leaving aside the thrill of having Kozzy re-sign, he's a real, structurally and just the type of player he is, that role he plays is super important for us. And it makes me laugh to think about the criticism the club Taylor got before Kozzy, the people talking about we should have picked Waitman, for instance, because he's a proven goal kicker. And, we took Kozzy way higher than what most fandom drafts had him. Some had him in second round player. So Taylor obviously earns he's earned his money there, hasn't he?
Delightful Play had just written quite late in the piece in our podcast thread. Any comments on how we have most of our stars locked into contracts and a beautiful premiership window sparkling ahead of us next few years? So we sort of went through. Big Man did mention all of those players that we've locked in. Now, I guess the ones remaining we've got coming out of contract this year, Chandler, who I'm sure they'll now, after the year, we'll talk more about Chandler shortly. I'm sure they'll be into him now to try and lock him away. The other one's Dunstan. I'm not sure what will happen there. He was sort of an insurance policy, and I'm sure if he wants to look elsewhere for more opportunities, the club will let him. Hibbert and Melksham are on that list. I would probably say, we've all written Hibbert off many times, but him and Melksham will probably hang up the boots at the end of this year. The other one there is James Jordan, who I guess has put contract talks on hold. He's doing really well at the moment. If we can sort of guarantee him a spot in this team, I'm sure he'll re-sign, but I think he'll be, and rightfully so, looking to see what happens for the rest of the year before he decides to sign, because I'm sure he could walk into quite a few teams and get straight in. And then there's Tajwe Woden, who I'm sure they'll probably re-sign, and that shouldn't be too much trouble. But we've locked away pretty much everyone that year. We've got a couple next year that we'll have to work on, but there's a lot of names I'm seeing there that I have no doubt will be able to re-sign and won't be looking to go elsewhere. So that's for next year for us to talk about, so I won't go into all those names. But we've done very well.
And as I mentioned last week, one of the really brilliant things that they've done is the structure of the contracts. All of those players are under contract vary in lengths. We've got Gus and Track and Ollie locked in for 5-6 years, and then Salo, I think 6 years, and Max is 3-4 years.
Yeah. Oliver 2030, Track 2029, Brayshaw 2028, Grundy, Rivers and now Kozzy 2027, Fritsch, Neil Bullen, Salen 2026, and then you got like Gorn, May, Petty, Spargo, Van Rooyen and Viney 2025, and then there's the rest are into 2024.
And the brilliant thing about that is that it means they can, George noted that there's risks involved with this, and that's absolutely right. But that gives them some flexibility about the timing of their contracts, and they can back end some and defer some payments. And for instance, when we go into negotiations with Van Rooyen, we'll have some flexibility to be able to keep a player like that, and we'll have a top 5 draft pick coming into the club next year that in 4 or 5 years' time might be also needing a $600,000-$700,000 a year contract. So it's smart by the club. And the other one is Nibbler signed during the week. Didn't get much fanfare, and just while I think of it, is I meant to bring it up, but I can't find the tweet, but there was a quote from Charlie Spargo about Spargo and re-signing,
About Nibbler's re-signing.
About Nibbler, talking about Nibbler, and the quote, often he's, as we've talked about, he's often not maligned, but he's sometimes thought of as quote unquote just a role player, and I think that argument's been had and lost, so to speak, and he's much more than that. But what I found really interesting about the quote from Charlie Spargo was
which I've got here, by the way.
Can you read it?
Yep. Could not ask for a better teammate. Fearless, selfless, extremely hardworking and loyal. A pleasure to play with. Well deserved, Nibsy.
So what really jumped out from that quote was none of that is about his ability as a footballer. It's all about who he is as a person. He's a great teammate. He's a teammate. He's a hard worker. He's loyal. They're character traits. They're about him as a person. And one, it says a hell of a lot for the how his teammates regard him. But two, I think that it says obviously a lot about Nibbler, but the culture that Goody's trying to build is that the first things people say about him is who he is as a person, not who he is as a footballer. And all of those character traits come out in his footy. And, there was 2 brilliant bits of selfless play by 3 brilliant bits of play, and 2 of them were super selfless. There was the rundown tackle by Nibbler, which was just him all over. It was that refusal to not keep trying, to be alert, to go for it. But there was a brilliant bit of selfless play, which, for me, just ticked tells me everything I need to know about Nibbler. There was a kick into the forward line. Was it in the 3rd quarter? I think perhaps it was the last quarter. Beautiful cross into the centre to Nibbler, basically, and Track called him out. Track was behind him. Nibbler had every right to take the mark, and in fact, arguably probably should have. He's a forward who's judged by some on his goals, but he heard Track, who called him out, and let it go through to Track, and Track marked.
And in the last second as well, and did that well, the way he did it, because he could have fluffed it up as well as trying to take it.
And for me, that said, he's a forward who's basically given up a goal. So great culture, I think, that is being built at the club, and obviously Goody, but others, Uze, the whole coaching staff and the club, deserve a lot of credit for the culture they've built.
Well, we asked our listeners to provide 5-star reviews and comments on Apple Podcast or wherever you get your podcasts, and would read those out read out your reviews on the show. So as always, I ask you, our loyal listeners, please take a moment now, pause the show, go and write that 5-star review. We'll read it out next week. All right, thanks for that. Fogman138 says, quality has come up. A few years ago, I made the following comment. Content is in-depth and well thought out, but investing in some better mics would make it easier to listen to. Fogman goes on to say, and the pod has gotten better and better. Keep up the good work. Bin Man for PM. There you go, Bin Man. Thanks for that, Fogman. The audio quality has gotten better over the years, primarily as my knowledge of podcasting has grown, but also because in the past we connected to the co-host using Skype, and the audio you heard was so compressed that any of that audio that came from the co-host was extremely poor. Now the audio from my co-host, I'll spare you all the details about it, it's recorded and saved on their ends. A long, boring technical story short, the audio does sound a lot better today. So thank you, Fogman, for re-evaluating and resending in your thing. I think he had given us a 3-star review originally, and he's bumped it up to 5. So thank you very much. Jono says, keep up the work, love your work, appreciate the research, and often send your podcast on to others. Well, thanks, Jono. Appreciate that. It's one of the best ways our listeners can reward us. Spread the word. Let others know that you listen to the Demonland podcast. The more people that listen, the more people that will join the discussion on demonland.com, and more voices, more opinion, more discussion. There's nothing better than chatting with D's fans about our great club. If you want to chat with other D fans, head over to demonland.com, sign up. You can chat with other Demon fans. It's totally free. If you'd like to join us on the air tonight to talk about any of the topics we're going to talk about, please give us a call on 0390163666. That's 0390163666. I'll answer, put you on mute, bring you on when we can. During the week, you can call that number, leave us a message, we'll play it on the show. If you're listening live, you can join us in the chat room by simply heading on over to demonland.com/podcast. We're live every Monday at 8:30 p.m. If you've downloaded this podcast and want to listen to us live when we do go live, please join us on Mondays at 8:30 p.m. at demonland.com.
Dissecting the rounds match from the depths of the game that was, it's over to Andy, Binman and George with the match wrap-up.
The Demons went on to blitz straight out of the blocks, piling on 5 goals straight in 12 minutes and 19 seconds by halftime. The D's had piled on 3 more goals, taking a 44-point lead into the first break. And I can't remember the last time that we kicked 8 goals in a first quarter. I went as far back to 2018 when we thrashed the Crows in Alice Springs. We kicked 7 in the first quarter that day. The midfield battle was always going to favour the Ds, with North's best on-baller, LDU, being ruled out late in the week. Our on-ballers were dominant, with Christian Petracca and Clayton Oliver in scintillating form. Track had 35 possessions, 16 contested, 14 score involvements, 9 inside 50s, 552 metres gained and 3 goals. Oliver had 37 possessions, 15 contested, 8 score involvements and 4 inside 50s. Along with Viney and Sparrow, the D's had a bevy of talent rolling through the middle, with JJ, Pickett, Brayshaw, Rivers and Harms all attending centre bounces. Our dynamic duo in the ruck got another match under their belts, working together, and what a splendid job they did of dismantling the Roos. Grundy, 27 hitouts with 9 to advantage and 4 clearances. Max, 21 hitouts with 6 to advantage and 4 clearances too. The Demons were rock solid in defence, with May and Lever marking or spoiling almost every entry that came in. The janitor Brayshaw was mopping up everything that came his way, leading with 11 intercept possessions. Rivers and Bowie 7, May and Lever 6, McVie 5, Hibbard 2. They did their parts as well. Our forwards causing havoc on their way to scoring our 4th 100-plus score for the season. This from a team and forward line that most media pundits in the pre-season said would struggle to kick big scores. Fritsch 4, Chandler, Petracca and Pickett 3, Grundy 2, Shaki and Rui 1 each. It was great to bank the 4 points and the healthy percentage boost. And yes, I was disappointed not to crack the ton, but I'll leave those useless celebrations to my Carlton mates to carry on about beating a Waffles second team.
Some of the numbers are spooky. Some can't be explained by conventional means. But that won't stop the boys from trying. Coming up now, it's the Demonland Stats File.
That's right. That's what time it is this week on the Stats Files. B-Man wants to talk about the AFL player ratings. Take it away.
Thanks, Andy. And thank you, Michael. I was a big shout out to Michael. I was a bit surprised and taken aback last week with the, I don't even know what you call those things. What do you call?
Stingers
or some such thing.
Back end,
they're brilliant. And
like
I was a little embarrassed and didn't gather myself. So thank you, Michael. They're brilliant. Very, very much appreciated. So
I was busy this weekend. This week I didn't really chase up to thank him again for it, but I will do that this week.
Great.
So sorry, Michael, if you are listening. I wasn't. It's just flat out.
Yeah, so for stats, really huge thanks to Wheelo Ratings, and I've said this before, but there's a fantastic website that's called Wheelo Ratings, WEELO Ratings, all one word. Google it. It's a fantastic site, and it's continually getting better.
I mentioned it a bit later with some of the things. So
yeah, and so I asked. He's Willow Rating, the person who's put that site together, is added for each match a summary of the key stats that can be pulled down off publicly.
Do we need to get Willow on one day? Just thinking out loud.
Yeah,
we'll talk about it after.
Great. I'll reach out. I'll reach out.
All right, reach out. We can chat about anything.
Well, I'd be really interested in the data analysis and stats just generally, because there's a question later on that sort of touches on this issue about clearances, and I'll speak to that then. But I asked Willow if it was possible. He added meters gained to that chart, and I asked whether it was possible also to get the time in forward half, because as we've talked about, the key information I checked to get on that board on the weekend.
Did he have those stats? Does he have access to that?
Well, no, and he looked around, but Herald Sun has them, and so but it's behind a digital paywall, which he's paid for this month, which is awesome, and so he's got those stats, and I'm just bear with me while I find it. So the Richmond North Melbourne game he'd put up, and I just didn't see it before the the podcast last week, but just from going back to the Richmond game, the time in forward half was 47.53 our way, so pretty good from Richmond's perspective, those numbers. And I'm just trying to find the North Melbourne one. So this week, the time in forward half for the Ds was 60-40, 60% our way, and 40% their way, obviously. And the pressure points, which was really interesting. So the pressure for the game, and I'll talk to this in a little bit later in the about our performance, I guess, but I thought it was really interesting. Quarter one, our pressure rating was 189, and what I found interesting in this, and keeping in mind 180, we've talked already a couple of weeks ago about how that's defined. 180 apparently is the average, the AFL average. So 189 was that first quarter was above average. I was really surprised to read that North Melbourne's pressure in that was 185 in that quarter. And at the end of the game, our total average across the four quarters was 169, and theirs was 163. And the reason why I found that interesting was because you were saying before we came on that Kane Corns was bagging North Melbourne basically, and I don't know if you mentioned that he was taking some of the gloss off Melbourne's win, but he was pointing out in that first quarter how poor they were. And what was interesting is that I actually thought their pressure was pretty good when live at the ground. I thought it was pretty good. I thought the issue for them was their defensive system was all out of whack, and so it was not really an issue about their effort levels. It was about their pressure. And why I found that interesting as well, because Clarkson was at pains to say in the presser that he thought that their pressure and endeavour was good, and the numbers suggest that it was. So, I think that seems to be those ratings, seem to at least suggest that their effort was good. I thought their defensive system was appalling. Though that's not really an effort. So that last quarter, the quarter four, when we kicked away, although they kicked the last 3 goals, 153 to 139, so it dropped away a little bit. But I heard Track say afterwards they were exhausted. He was interviewed on SEN after the game and said that they were totally exhausted. But the big number for in terms of time and forward half was 60% for us, and that's exactly what they would be looking for. That first quarter was an incredible quarter of footy. I thought we were so switched on, and one of the things about the AFL player rankings, I'm not entirely sure. I haven't really drilled down on it to see what how accurate I think it is or how useful as a guide it is. And I found it super, super difficult to find any information about how the ratings are defined. So what I did find, I'm hoping this is still accurate, it was from 2 or 3 years ago, is that there's multiple categories: ball winning, ball use, hit outs, defence, and then negatives, and subcategories within each of them. Ball winning has stoppages, mid-chains, intercepts. Ball use has run and handball, field kick, shot at goal, kick-ins, hit outs. Defence has spoils and pressure. And then they get points for all of them to get your... To arrive at the score. The negatives points off, so you get frees against, you lose points if you give a free against, 50-metre penalty, and your debits are points lost from drop marks or no pressure errors and missed tackles. So that's how they arrive at it. And as I said, I'm not entirely convinced yet that it's how accurate that is as a way of sort of defining players. But what I found interesting was what you put up, actually, and so did Willow on the stats as well. Just let me bring it up. Was the player rankings over each quarter. So where is it? Sorry, bear with me for a sec.
As I told you, B-Man, we do have a caller. So caller, just wait. We'll get you on after the stats files.
Yes, I had all of this loaded up, but it's on multiple different pages. So, here we go. So, the player of the match by these ratings in total across the 4 quarters was Kozzy, which surprised me a little bit, to be honest. Track was second. That didn't surprise me. Angus Brayshaw was third, and I think he's a player that tends to fly under the radar a little bit, but he was third, and Kade Chandler was fourth. Then Liam Shields and Ben Cunnington. So our top 4 players on the rating for the game was Kozzy, Track, Gus, and Kade. So I'll be really interested to see, for instance, what the coaches vote for that. You think Track would be up there and Kozzy too?
Coaches' votes were out today. Track had all got the 10 votes. Oliver 7, then 5 was I think Gus and Chandler got 5, and then 3 was Kozzy, and that was it.
Well, Oliver was down in about 10th on that listing of a score of 15, aggregated score of 15.1 compared to Kozzy's 26.9. And, looking at the stats before and trying to get my head around how that equates to, the quality of the play, you could put an argument together that it captures impact. That it captures the impact and influence they had on the game. But what I really wanted to talk about was the quarter one. So this table has got all of the ratings for each quarter, for each player. And given we started so brilliantly, we had such a incredible beginning of the game and set up the game, I was really curious looking at this table as to who our best players were. And in that first quarter, not surprisingly, Kozzy was by far and away. He had a rating score in that quarter of 11.7, which is way up there in the ratings. And Track was 7.7. Brayshaw had a huge first quarter, 8.5, and then Clayton Oliver 7.8. Sorry, and Fritter 8. So and then Chandler was down in 5th. But if you look at, I mean, Kozzy's not one of our senior, I guess he's closing in on a senior player, but he's one of our younger ones. But that first quarter, so it was really Pickett, Track, Fritter, and to a lesser extent Chandler, but Gus right up there that really got us going. And so I felt like, I'll be interested to look at those numbers. I'm going to take a little bit more of an interest in those numbers to get a sense of, maybe have a look at comparing them to, for instance, the Demonland voting system to see how that compares. But, the one that jumped off the page looking at those numbers was a rating of 11.7 for Kozzy in the first quarter, and it really reinforced everything we're talking about, but it also picked up how he can be such an incredible impact player. And I was reflecting last week about our discussion about Kozzy, and I said that he had a fairly quiet game, but I think it's important to remember that in that game, he got Baker was sitting on him. So Goody talks about this sometimes, is sometimes players with low numbers who have been tagged, they take advantage of tactically in the box. And ultimately they had to move Baker off Kozzy, and Kozzy got off the chain a bit against Richmond. But that's a huge first quarter from the young fella. Maybe he knew he had... presumably he'd already signed or knew that he was about to. Hopefully we'll see it again for the rest of the season.
And just on the Demonland voting, the Demonland Player of the Year, I think it's the most unscientific way of measuring anything. So
well, I would argue perhaps not, because it depends how many. The more people entering their opinion, you've probably got a more accurate gauge, all people who love Melbourne and watching the game, passionate enough to be going onto Demonland in the first place, and then doubly passionate enough to bother putting the votes, their votes in. So in some respects, it's probably as good, if not better, than almost any other methodology to work out who the best players were.
We do have a caller. So caller, you're on the air. Welcome to the Demonland podcast. Sorry to keep you waiting.
Buongiorno, è Giorgio sulla uscita, or George on the outer from people who want to speak English. How are you, Andy?
Oh, mate, I'm good. I wasn't expecting you to call in. Hey, how are you?
I'm good. I'm over here trying to find a new recruit in Rome, but I'm not having much luck. There don't seem to be too many AFL players over here. And from the sounds of things, it's good to know Bin Man's going to start setting his betting patterns based on Demonland votes. So we'll see how that transpires in the coming weeks.
If I would have known if I would have known you were on the phone, George, from overseas, I wouldn't have kept you waiting. I would have brought you straight on.
Oh, either that or you might have hung up. So
that's true.
But that's true. Yeah, we'll give you that one. Yeah, I was just wondering how everyone's feeling, given that we've got. We've locked away basically all our major players for the next 4 to 5 years, especially after Kozzy's done it. And, we're sitting basically, short of one kick in Adelaide. We would have been on top of the ladder. Things are looking pretty up, and I was wondering how your MFCSS is going at the moment, or has that been put to bed again?
My MFCSS, I take it one day at a time, like an addict. It's one day at a time. Today's good. Today's a good day. I'll say that, but tomorrow, who knows what will come, George? Big man?
Yeah, I was just thinking about you, George, before, is that you would have heard, I'm sure, Kozzy re-signed, or, haven't got any news over there in Italy?
Yes.
That
No, there's a thing called the internet which enables us to communicate these days. We don't have to wait for newspapers. So that's fantastic. But, yeah, like I was saying from the start, we've now got basically all our major players signed away, for 4 to 5 years. And if anybody's doubting that we're in the premiership window and we're planning for that, it's pretty obvious in front of us. Kozzy was probably the last little piece in the jigsaw to come together. So that's great news for all of us.
And I mentioned, George, that that was a real kudos, and that's where I was thinking of you, was the big tick for the governance and management. For the club in terms of how they've managed this situation, but how they've managed all of the other contract negotiations, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. It's all got to fit together. And after the announcements that basically there's going to be a 19th team in Tasmania, within the next 2 to 3 years, you need all these quality players locked away. And like I said, it's exactly what we need in this premiership window. And I was just reflecting as well that, how quickly that window closes. In 2015, North Melbourne played off in a preliminary final, which they lost. But, that's, 6 years ago. The cliff comes very quickly, for a team that lost to us by 90 points. So we might as well enjoy it while we're up here and take full advantage. But you've got to make sure that you've got everybody available for those 4 to 5 years to do so.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you may not have heard this news because this was very late breaking news just before we came on. Did you hear that we secured a training and our own facilities?
No. That is for me is bigger news than signing Kozzy.
Oh, sorry.
Because
a bit of humour, the Demonland humour there. No, we didn't. I was just joking, George.
I was
Thanks
just
very
frantically
much.
searching on the internet.
You're off the Christmas card list. That's it.
Can't make jokes like
if we
that.
happen to speak to anyone from the club while you're away, I promise I will ask about it and say, George asked me to ask you where the bloody home ground is.
And I'm positive I could tell you I could tell you exactly what they would likely to say.
We're in advanced discussions with the state governments and key stakeholders.
We've got something coming. So yes, we've heard that before.
We've got something,
Anyhow,
and when we can tell you, you'll be very excited, and you'll be the first people we tell. That's exactly what you'll hear.
That's good to know. Yeah, well, I want that sorted out. I'm over here for the next couple of weeks, so I want to sort it out before I get back. Okay.
So where I can hear traffic in the background. Can you disclose your location?
Yeah, I'm in the middle of Rome.
Very nice.
And the middle of Rome is traffic.
I know that. I do. George, enjoy, and I'm sure we'll hear from you over the next few weeks. Please call in again, and you stay safe and have fun. Yeah.
Good on you, George.
Yeah, I can't get as far away as what Terence does, but I think Rome's a fairly good starting off point. So
I'm very impressed that you've gone overseas to load and to get ready for the second half of the season. It's very impressive.
Well,
you got to build up these things, and you're the right man to know all about that.
Well, if nothing else, you'll be carb loading on all that pizza and pasta while you're away. So enjoy.
Okay, thanks, guys. Catch you soon.
That was George on the outer. Our co-host, he's over in Rome. Taking some time off from the podcast. We forced leave.
Now, because the stats file hasn't been formally closed off yet.
Oh no, I thought it was. But
we've got a great stat in the we've got a great stat in the chat room from Stu. D's have won 21 out of 28 quarters. Next best is Blues, Crows and Dons, all on 17. That's statistically 4 more than the next best, is incredibly impressive. And I was trying to think around my theory around football being, the changing face of football and how significant fitness and aerobic capacity has become in modern footy, and what stats that are publicly available would give you a guide on how you could measure that, apart from your eye, obviously, which is a bit difficult. And the only one I could really think of is last quarters, because it is the scores in the last quarter and your ability to win last quarters, because obviously the more tired you are, the more difficult it is come late in the game, and you'd expect, logic would suggest that the fitter teams are going to outscore the less fit teams in the last quarter, and based on that, we're the only team so far to have won every single fourth quarter.
Did we win the fourth quarter this week, despite them kicking the last couple of goals?
We did. I checked that for this very reason. Yeah.
Well, it just goes to show if the next, we're 21 out of 28, and then the next 3 are Blues, Crows and Dons on 17, just shows how impressive Collingwood have been to have, they're at least 16 or less quarters won, and they sit atop the ladder, a game clear.
So, Andy, look, I've heard enough talking about Collingwood forever.
I won't talk about
it's
Collingwood.
like I didn't realise there was only one team playing in the AFL at the
You know
moment,
what?
if you
Someone
believe the
said
media.
to-
So can we not talk about it?
No, we won't. But someone said to me, let Collingwood be on top. Let them focus on them. If we're on top, it's all Melbourne. You remember last year we were top, hadn't lost a game. When who's going to beat them? I'd prefer to be let's just sit where we're sitting. We don't need to be top of the ladder.
Well,
I mean,
it was
it's
about whether
nice,
we're going to
but,
lose. It was never with the full love in that Collingwood are getting. My God.
You know what? They just keep doing it.
Yeah, they keep doing
They
it.
find
It
a
was
way
an
to win.
impressive win, yeah.
Because I don't have the confidence that we could do what they do week in, week out, just over and over again. I always think when we're in that position, we'll lose the game rather than they can just win it and they have this belief that they can win it. I don't think we're there mentally.
Except for the fact that apparently 17 times have been in a scenario where the game's something under 10 points or some such, talk about on a first crack. Every 15 of those times they've gone on to win. The 2 times they haven't, we're in the finals. And so I'm getting pretty sick of the Collingwood excellent and the world beaters and everyone sees them as the favourite, blah, 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 because they got, they didn't win the grand final last year. Geelong won the grand final last year. They didn't win it the previous year. We did. Sure, they're exciting to watch, but they went out to, albeit ultimately they went out to the grand finalists, but nonetheless, there's a long season to go and, I think we're a better team. We're pound for pound better across the board. We're better in terms of our players and the systems. Well, that's another discussion, but I'm confident our system will beat theirs. So
we've all got opinions and we've all got our own thoughts, but we like to get another take on it. You can get your questions and say through on 0390163666 and via demonland.com. It's time to hear from you with your listener questions on the Demonland podcast.
That's right. Each week we ask Demonlanders to post their questions and comments in that week's podcast thread on demonland.com, and we always read them out. We answer them on the show. If you're not a member of Demonland, you just listen to the podcast, then what are you waiting for? Head over to demonland.com, sign up and join in on the conversation. In addition to asking questions for the podcast, there are a plethora of other conversations about all things D's related. If you really want to ask a question but aren't on Demonland, then shoot us an email at demonland@demonland.com with the subject question for the podcast. You can also leave us a voicemail at 0390163666, 0390163666. Don't worry, nobody answers the phone. You don't have to talk to a human. If you follow us on Facebook, Twitter or Instagram, then just slide into our DMs, ask a question there. We'll keep your real name anonymous if you wish. Tonight we have a question from I've already done that part. We had Donna who asked a question about Kozzy, so we'll move on. We have D Old Fart. He says, no question from me this week. Just want to express my enjoyment of the pods and my strong appreciation of the time and effort that you guys put into making them so good. Week in, week out, go D's. D Minion says, as always, loving the podcast, boys. I was on Stephen May Niggle watch this week. Thought he was moving a little bit better this week, but there was a couple of times I thought he had trouble bending over. Other than that, he was simply superb in the air. Such courageous marking. If there is an issue with his back, he certainly won't shirk going back into a contest. Stephen May, he's just unbelievable. I think last week Demonland posted a nudge. He mentioned that in the chat room that he'd heard something about the back issue being back related, perhaps something to do with a disc in his back, and that each week he was getting 5 to 10% better. So perhaps Dominion is right to say that this week he was moving better. Was it 5%, 10%? Who can say? In any event, injury or no, the guy gives 150% every time he takes the field. Some of the marks he takes are simply superb. Reads the flight of the ball so well, often a lot better than his opponent. This week, 5 intercept marks and 5 spoils. He's so courageous. What do you reckon, big man?
I thought that exactly, if I was to write my summary of his game, that's exactly how I would have written it. Was it Dominion? That's exactly what I would
Yeah.
have said. I thought he looked a lot better, stretching up for the marks, but still seemingly struggling a little bit with the
The
ground
bending, yeah.
balls.
Because he really could stretch for those marks. You could
Yeah.
see some of them he went sort of back.
And I said before the game
yeah.
that in some respects it was a great matchup, Larky, because he was coming back from an injury too, wasn't he? Like, am
Yeah, I
I
think
imagining that? Yeah. So, strong player, Larky. I really, really rate Larky. Fantastic footballer.
Yeah, he's good.
And but coming back a bit rusty. So great matchup for Stephen May in any case, because it's a one-on-one and May's strong enough to go with Lucky's. I thought that was his best game for the season, Steve May. So yeah, I think that summary is pretty spot on.
Pew 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 says, we had the luxury this week to experiment with a lot of different players running through the midfield. Do any of you have the stats, i.e. percentage of time in the midfield? The only stat I could find on this comes from our mate Willow Ratings website, which we mentioned we mentioned on the podcast. We've mentioned it a number of times. Andrew Whelan, he's a D supporter, isn't he? Because he's a member of Demon Land. He has a website called wheeloratings.com, and he takes the publicly available stats. So I think they're from Champion Data, and presents them on his website. I think he's got stats going back to 2012, stats for each game, each player, each team, a number of stats, including stats on tennis and basketball, I believe, as well. And yeah, big man, we should get him on the show, so remind me about that. Anyway, the stats that he has in regards to time in the midfield is the centre bounce attendance percentage. So I guess that doesn't take into account stoppages around the ground or throw-ins, but Clayton Oliver attended 75% of centre bounces, Sparrow 53%, Max and Brody 50% each, Viney 47, Track 41, Pickett 34, Jordan 22. Interestingly, Harms 16% of centre bounces from only 16% game time, and then Gus 9% and Rivers 3%. And I thought I'd see Nibbler in the middle for one or two, but it's possible I confused that for a stoppage around the ground. Big man, we certainly took advantage of the weaker opposition to share the midfield load this week. We really did give a number of guys a chop in there.
Yeah, and I thought it was interesting because they really rolled more through there this time, didn't they? Yep. And that was really noticeable with the ground. So I thought JJ was good again, and it's those numbers reflect what I was thinking about watching. It was great to see extra players or more players getting rolled through there, and I'd have to go back, but Kozzy, I don't think Kozzy was in any centre bounces last week, and so it was great to see him get some midfield minutes. And on Kozzy, I think they're playing him in. I mentioned this last week, but that high half forward means that he can almost be, even when he's not. His starting point is basically on the line of the centre square, and so he can almost become a midfielder if it goes our way. If the ball moves towards our goal, he's right at that contest. So even when he's not in the centre bounce, he's almost like a quasi midfielder when he gets that opportunity. And just quickly on some other stats from that game, that the other one that I've talked about being a key fundamental of our game, of course, is contested possessions, and we were plus 32 contested possessions, but North weren't too far away. That we pulled away in the last quarter when they were evidently tiring. And then the other big one for it was meters gained. We had 1,500 more meter gained than them, which is just massive. If you think, collectively 1.5 kilometres more meters gained. Part of the challenge for them was that I heard Sanderson talk about this idea of kicking back and forward. I like the analogy, the windshield wiper. North going sort of across the ground. It just now for 2-3 years into Melbourne's method, even watching it now, you go, well, that's dead footy, isn't it? 2018, that's essentially what the Eagles' whole game plan was move it across until they could open it up and then move forward. And Geelong too, for that matter.
We have 2 questions relating to clearances, so I'll read both of them out and then get your response, Bin Man. Dr. Gonzo says, in our losses and the first half against Richmond, opposition mids seem to sit outside our mids, waiting for us to get first possession and then scragging/tackling us to cough it up and ultimately lose the clearance. With such prolific ball winners like Track, Oliver and Viney, whose instinct is to get first hands on the footy, what can we do to combat that when we come up against the better teams? We don't want to give up front position at the contest, but we don't want to be sitting ducks either. So how do we maximise the talent we have in the middle? I have no doubt we will see similar tactics used when we come up against the Pies, Saints, Crows and Cats. DJR adds, guys, I'm trying to get my head around our stoppage clearances. We have arguably the 2 best ruckmen in the game as well as arguably the best midfield, yet we are ranked last in stoppage clearance. I feel this is more of a tactical play rather than a flaw with the game plan. Goody, in my opinion, is more concerned with how we set up post-clearance and is comfortable with allowing the opposition to bring extra numbers to the stoppages. Although Clary, Track, Viney and Sparrow are having fantastic seasons and are contested beasts, their stoppage clearance ratings are significantly lower this season. Clary was ranked number 1 last year and is currently ranked 32 this year. I've also noticed with interest that in the Tigers' premiership years of 20 and 21, they were also ranked last and second last in this metric. What is your take on this now? Big man, you're the clearance king of our podcast, so take it away.
As a general comment, I think that it's a bit like hit outs, isn't it? It's my bugbear really about the stats. And for listeners, for new listeners to the podcast, I'm no expert. I'm just, not that there was an implication that I was, but my interest in stats, my interest in the analysis is trying to understand the game. And my frustration is how poorly it's explained to people like myself who are interested. Although, I will say that there's some improvements this year, partly driven by everyone wanting just to super analyse Collingwood. So you can take some inferences and information from the Collingwood explanations of their game plan and apply them to ours. So one of them is Collingwood bring an extra to the stoppage, and the clearances therefore for them are super important because then they bring an extra to the stoppage, but then win that ball and run in waves from that point. But it also, I spoke before about two systems, is that from that point they, everyone knows it now, is they move that ball really quickly up the ground. That's the go. But part of the challenge for them, is that because they do bring an extra to the stoppage, they don't have an extra behind the ball. And so it's a bit of Russian roulette. And it speaks to this issue. If we're playing them, for instance, and win that clearance, we've got one less at that clearance. So we're less likely to win clearances against teams that bring an extra to the stoppage. In previous years, teams would bring an extra stoppage to us as a way to negate our midfield strength. That's not what Collingwood do. Collingwood bring an extra to the stoppage, and so do the Bulldogs, for instance, as part of their game plan, to increase the likelihood, one, that they win that particular stoppage, and then to have multiple players to feed the ball out and to start moving it forward. Our challenge is a little bit, let's touch on those questions, is winning those clearances and setting up, but we've got protection behind the ball. But the emphasis is really on quality clearances. It's touched on in the first question around post-clearance possession. We win from that point. If we do lose the clearance, it goes towards the opposition's goal. We've got our extra there. Hopefully we rebound. From that point. It's a big part of the way we score. But if we do win it, you will have seen on the weekend, we win it clean and we get out the front of contests. I think that idea about, it's interesting that question about players sweating on it, because you remember in 2019 there was a big discussion, wasn't there, about other teams had worked us out because we're all bees to the honey pot, and they just wait for us to win it because we're so good, and then they sweat on the outside, which is a little bit of an echo in that question of that. I'm not entirely sure that that's how that happens, but the sort of the modern way of those clearances is if think of it like a circle around, 20 to 30 metres from that clearance. And if you look at the footy, if you go to the footy, no one's more than 40 metres from the footy at any given point. And then there's that the ring around that. And Collingwood are really brilliant at getting it out. Dogs, when they're on with their handballing, getting it out. But we've brought that into our game too. And I think partly that's where those really long handballs that, as I said last year, we really introduced them. They're now standard across every team does them, those really long forward handballs to get them outside of that ring out to the players. So I think that I take the point about the opposition sweating on us, but I think that probably reflects why Ollie is down the bottom, because he's not necessarily winning them at the coalface and getting them out. So, you want him to be, I'd like to know the numbers of his handball received from that scenario, because he's become a more damaging player. And I wouldn't be surprised if he's less in and under, but I don't know. I haven't seen sort of the stats to back that up. I think it's fascinating the different strategies around the stoppages, but one thing that's really become really important again is those chains of handballs. What was really interesting watching the Dogs on the weekend is that they went back to the future, so to speak. They went back with those chains of handballs to when they were at their best in that 2021, in that first half of the season. That those chains of handballs are their strength, and they really look to use them again in the game just gone. So, the short answer is, sort of my frustration with the stats, looping back to before, is they're not really telling us what we need to know about the game. They don't help me understand the total clearances. It's a bit like, as I said, total hit outs. Really what's important is your scores from the clearances and how often you score and your quality of the clearances. So for in the game just gone, in the North Melbourne game, we scored 125 from centre bounces. They didn't score any. From ball ups, we scored 3 goals, 220. They scored 8 points. Throw-ins, we scored 3 goals, 119. They scored a point. So those clearances, just adding them up, 4, 7, 10 goals to 1 from clearances. So, we could lose that game, lose the clearance number. I'm not sure if we did in this game, but we could lose that, but we've scored 10 goals to 1, and I had to laugh because in the Essendon game, the clearances, we were up in the first half in clearances, well up, but we're getting smashed. So it's increasingly, as I said, the example is like hit outs. Hit outs are no longer indicative of anything useful, and increasingly just clearance numbers by themselves aren't particularly useful. It's really scores from your clearances and your stoppages that is the critical number or numbers.
Red and Blue Make Purple says, why is Grundy Gorn working when Bruce Gorn failed? And I'll assume that Red and Blue Make Purple was taking the piss here, and surely he's not comparing a 2-time All-Australian Brodie Grundy to Braden Bruce, and no offence to Braden Bruce. B-Man Gorn and Grundy, they're 50-50 for percentage of centre bounce attendances. How did you find their games, and where they were positioned when they weren't in the ruck, or when they were in the ruck? They're often standing a kick behind the play, sort of out of, when we'd go forward, one of them, whoever was rucking, would sort of hang back a little bit. How'd you find that pairing working this week?
Well, just on Bruce and Gorney, I mean, it depends what your definition of failure is. We copped a bit of stick for bringing Bruce in, and Bruce copped a bit of stick coming to Melbourne. The poor bugger hasn't been able to get himself right at the Giants, has he? But what was, in hindsight now, you can see actually what they were thinking. So we got Jackson after Bruce. They were looking at 2 ruckman setup ages ago. So, it's now become an ace in our, in our hand, and other teams are looking to copy having 2 ruckmen. So, at the time, people, were having a go at Melbourne for why would you bring Bruce in to sit on the, I have no, in hindsight, I would suggest that if Bruce had kept fit, then they would have run them together at some point. I mean, that's where we've gone, hasn't it? So we've gone to 2 ruck. So, it might, another way of looking at the Bruce, bringing Bruce in was, foreshadowing where we've ended up going with getting Jackson and now Grundy. And to answer your question about Grundy, I'm really impressed with Grundy, I have to say. I'm surprised how good he is. And same with Hunter. I'm surprised how physically strong he is. In some respects, as George has noted, he's a different type of ruckman to Gorney, but he feels like, I'm not sure what you think, but my feeling is he's a better pure tap ruckman than Gorney, but maybe that's a bit unfair on Gorney. But it seems to me that
Gorney has done some magnificent taps. Just have a look at the tap down to track in that forward line.
Well,
it's fantastic.
Although case in point of woeful defensive systems, that was
yes, can only beat who you play.
Yeah.
Come on.
But I thought their synergy was really good in this game. I like Maxi forward. I don't really like Grundy forward as much.
Well, Grundy kicked 2 goals, Max.
He did. Max couldn't hit the barn again, could he? The side of a barn. So,
although Max is a better marker around the ground, Grundy dropped a couple of sitters, but I think he made up for it a bit later. But yeah.
And the other really interesting thing about the way they're playing them is that, and this will please lots of Demons fan no end, is that, and I think this is sort of important to think about how we're playing in terms of the challenge of for a team that's so system based and so predictable, and we were running the same method and play last year, for instance, and the big one that everyone uses as an example was Steve May kicking to the same point on the ground.
But we're not though anymore.
We're not
doing
anymore.
That shorter kick.
And we're no longer having. I noticed on the weekend whether this is going to stick, whether it's a function of Brown and T-Mac not being in the team, but far less often are we kicking to a contest with multiple talls. And why that is relevant to Grundy and Gawn is that they were splitting on the weekend. So they were. What I mean by that is when we were kicking out from defence, and on that, Bowie probably took at least 50% of them. So it wasn't always Steve May. It was Bowie was quite often the person kicking in. And I noticed on the weekend is that instead of Max and Grundy both going to the one spot on the ground, they were splitting and being on the alternate halfback flanks. So 2 options from the kick out. It seemed to me that was a bit more of a dummy thing because Grundy was dragging one of their talls. You have to cover him.
You have to cover him.
Yeah, they didn't actually go to him at all very often. In fact, they may not have done it once, but they have to cover him.
It's a decoy.
So I think I think they're still feeling their way about how to get that combo right. But it looks fantastic to me. And I'm thrilled that we've got Grundy.
Bigfoot says, loving the podcast, raising the bar every week. Love to get the panel's thoughts on Josh Shackey's debut match for the D's this week. And look, it was Shackey's first game for the D's. It might take a while to build rapport or some synergy with his teammates. But having said that, Ben Brown is on the cusp of returning after extended weeks on the sideline. Petty's just returning out, having been out with concussion. T-Mac, having been dropped, is only a bag of goals away from a recall. You got to take your chances when you get them. And I must say, I was a little bit underwhelmed by his match. And don't get me wrong, I thought some of his passing was excellent. I just thought he got caught under the ball a few times on the lead as it was coming in a few times. I don't know whether that was because perhaps there was some bad kicking coming into our forward 50 or perhaps he just misjudged it. The fact is he didn't tear the game apart. I mean, no way suggesting he'd do what Curnow did to similar witches' hats on the same night out in the West. But, he's like-for-like replacement for a guy that never took his chances, and I guess we got like-for-like. And I was more bullish about Shackey than I ever was about Weed, or was bullish about Weed early on. But the moment, I think it's like-for-like. To be honest, neither he nor JVR gave much in terms of the leads up the ground, but perhaps, Big Man, you said maybe we're not doing that. And perhaps we're not doing that because those guys aren't capable of doing that yet, and that's more of a T-Mac Ben Brown thing, or perhaps that's just not the way we're playing, having those, forwards lead up the ground. So I guess the jury's still out as to what our best forward set up, and we're still going to have a mix and match a bit. We haven't quite found it yet, but I guess we'll keep looking. B-Man, what do you think of Shackey?
I thought I loved his kicking skills. Beautiful kick he hit.
Fantastic. He's good.
Yeah.
He's got skills. There's no
Yeah.
doubt about that.
Look, I thought
taking the marks.
I thought he was good. He took his chance when he had his shot at goal. He set up that goal to Fritter. I thought his effort was good.
And another one, I think, as well. We got a goal. From,
he's
one of his passes.
he's bigger than I thought he was. Like physically bigger. Like I knew he was tall, but in my mind's eye, I've seen him live. I don't know why I thought this, but he's
you're
less
never
bean
focusing. You're not focusing on him when he's not.
That's right. Maybe it's something about the MCG optical illusion, but his numbers weren't huge, were they? And I thought he did his role. It is interesting he didn't push up the ground. That I was surprised at that. It doesn't surprise me heaps that JVR does because he hasn't got the tank yet.
JVR, yeah.
And so
that I understand, but no one. We were getting nothing from any forwards up the ground. We were really screaming out for that.
Yeah, so ultimately we've talked about this a minute, and we'll keep on going back to it because Goody will be asked. Is that
it's not done yet?
As I said last week, I'm of the view that Goody does this deliberately, and because it's now the third year in a row he's doing it. Like, we haven't settled on our forward line, and I think he's added some sort of stuff around the game plan as well, and keeping the players sort of fresh and forward. And I think that what's really important though in terms of our forward line is the point you made is that we're scoring like crazy. People
fourth time 100 points
exactly. People at this time last year were having the same conversations, but bagging our forward line, saying they've got to sort this out. We can't score, and we're the highest scoring team in the AFL. So we're. And that's without having T-Mac and BB in there. So, again, as I said last week, Goody was explicitly asked in the Richmond post-match presser about what's his preferred setup, and he said 3 tools. That's where we'll get back to, I think. So what the ultimate look, how it looks is that I'm not sure. I did say last week that Shaki would get his go at some point in the rotation, and didn't have to wait very long for that to come to pass.
So I know we're not doing changes yet, but while we're on Shaki, do you reckon he stays in this week? Petty's probably back from concussion. I'm not sure what Ben Brown's injury status is. He's been playing at Casey, but...
Well, it's interesting. My gut feeling is, I'd love to see Shaki get another go. I hate when players only get 1 week. It feels like a bit unfair, but, it's really about how they've managed that situation. They may well have said to him, you're only going to get the 1 week. Don't stress if you get dropped.
Well, he wouldn't have had Petty not had concussion as likely. He wouldn't have got played anyway. Yeah.
So cutting to the chase for the Thingo, my feeling is Spargo will come back in. It's really interesting already that there's talk about him not coming back, earn his spot.
We'll talk about that.
We'll talk about later.
We'll get to
that. So I think Shaki will get dropped and Pets will come back in for him. That's the logical one.
Let's have a voicemail.
Hi, this is Noah from Bentley. Love the podcast, guys. Just wanted to know everyone's opinion about Kade Chandler. Just this year, I think he's really taken the next step and really cemented himself in the forward line. Just wanted to know your opinions, whether you think he'll get a longer contract extension, and what do you think has got him to the stage now where he's going to be a regular fit in the forward line, like with Bailey Fritsch. Love the podcast, go D's, and so great to hear that Kozzy signed on.
Kiwi D says, adds to that, and another shout out to my boy Chin Chandler. His third bag of 3 goals now, 13 for the season, a goal in every single game, second most goals for the Ds, 3 sausages behind Fritsch. You love to see it. Having a fantastic season to date, with the exception of Kozzy. He is probably the first genuine goal-kicking small forward since Garlett, then perhaps Davey and Farmer back there. We've had a few players playing that position, Bedford, Kent, Jay Kennedy, Harris. None of them really sort of got much chance or kicked on. And I don't really class him in the same category as Spargo and Nibbler. They play more high half forward, more defensive forwards. And they're not goal-kicking forwards per se. Someone asked the question in regards to Spargo and Chandler, and we'll get to that in a moment. But first, get your thoughts on Chandler's game and his year to date. Big man.
He's been brilliant, hasn't he? And one thing I think he brings is his energy and enthusiasm. He's clearly, he's clearly loved by his teammates. He's, and it's hard to, or obviously impossible to quantify what that means. But he seems like a real good culture player. And I was gutted for him last year when he went out from that suspension because. He probably would have got an extended crack in the team last year if not for that suspension. But I think he's been fantastic. And one of the things that's, really sets him out is that I think you're right, is that he's a classic true small forward. And you're also right that he doesn't play the same role. He's not competing with Spargo or Nibbler. They're not competing for the same role. It doesn't matter that they're both forward line players. The other thing I really like about him is he's such a good, technically strong kick. And so he's taken his chances after, some nerves early on. He's taken his chances with his goal kicking. But he's also a beautiful field kick. And the other thing, he's fantastic with his hands. He's great one-on-one. He's got good hands. He took a great mark, I thought.
Took a few nice marks, yeah.
Yeah. So, and I saw just before, again, I skipped off it, but he's was way up there in the pressure ratings for this match as well. So, when you add all of those things together, you get the package, don't you? He puts pressure on, he kicks goals, he takes his chances, and he's kicked some really clutch goals this season too. So the other thing that he's got going for, and I think this is increasingly really important in footy, is he's quick over the ground and he covers ground quickly. I think it's becoming super important. So we've got Kozzy, who's quick. Nibbler's quick over 80 metres. Chandler's quick over the ground. So I think that's an important thing attribute that he brings to the team. And he's not going out of the team, is he?
So Lazy asks if team selection had a live ladder, is Kade Chandler currently ahead of Charlie Spargo? So I think you're comparing apples to oranges here, as we just said, and I don't think they're not competing for the same position. And prior to Spargo's concussion, they were both playing in the same team. Spargo has the defensive / pressure skills to his game, as well as his disposal into forward 50. So no, they're not competing. I say.
But even if they were competing,
Chandler having to come out.
That's the thing about, even if they were competing, he would be well behind Spargo. Spargo has played every single game last year. Every single game. The coach selected him in a team that finished second on the ladder. In 2021, he played every single game bar one in a premiership year. He played every game this year. Why people would think he'd magically not be playing, I don't really understand. Spargo is super important to our team and our chances of success. He's super highly rated within the team. So the answer to that question, if it was Chandler or Spargo, sorry, Kade. I mean, Cade's just... You reckon
if they were competing for that last spot, and I don't think they are.
Well, they're not
competing for
and
the spot.
Spargo would
but
get
if
it.
they were, you're saying Spargo would get it over Chandler. He's kicked 6 goals in last 2 games.
Well, it doesn't matter, but so what? Spargo is a super important. It's a moot point, but Spargo has earned a bit more respect than who would come out, Kade Chandler or him. I mean, Kade Chandler's just starting his AFL journey. How many games has Sparks played? He must be up to 80 odd games by now.
Don't have the stats in front of me. I'll have a look in a sec. Lefty, he says, this week on Choco Watch, we were once again very accurate in front of the big sticks. Love this tweet from Wheelo Ratings. The tweet reads, most accurate AFL teams rounds 1 to 7, and these are from 2012 to 2023. In 2014, Hawthorn had a 61.9%. Melbourne in 2016 was 61.3% conversion rate. West Coast 2015, 60.4%, and the D's this year, 60.2%. So we're up there with some very accurate teams between 2012 and 2023. We just need, as Lefty says, need to get Big Maxi back in the Choco Goal Kicking Academy. He's the only one that is regularly letting us down in front of goals at the moment. And as you would all imagine. I'm absolutely wrapped with our kicking for goal so far this season. I have to pinch myself each week. Regular listeners to the show will know that one of my biggest gripes has always been, besides the umpires, has always been our accuracy in front of goal, and this glaring weakness has finally been rectified. And I know there are probably still going to be days where we just won't kick straight, but it's evident that we've worked on it, and the proof is in the pudding, and it's quite delicious. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely delicious. I'm trying to think what it would taste like, accuracy. It's
the pudding. The proof's in the pudding. The pudding's delicious. Goal-kicking pudding.
Said to someone at the footy on Saturday, might have been you actually.
Might have been me.
And that's in terms of a influence on the team, it's pretty hard to argue that Williams has actually been a huge factor in our increase in accuracy. I mean, Ockerman's razor would suggest, well, he wasn't doing it last year. He is this year, and our numbers have gone berserk. So, I reckon we would have lost 2 games this season if not for our accuracy. And so that's a huge impact of anyone involved, let alone a player, someone who's not playing and not not a senior coach or an assistant coach or perhaps senior. So, it's brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And I forget who put this on Demonland, so apologies for the poster, but made the point about that he listened to, they listened to the Demonland interview that we did with Brodie, and commented on the fact that he made the comment how surprised he was how much time Melbourne spend on goal kicking practice compared to his time at Collingwood. And so I thought, that was I'd forgotten that was a really interesting comment. And as you say, the proof's in the pudding. And I watched the replay or the third quarter earlier today, or just before we came on actually, but I didn't realise this at the game, but listening to the commentary, we were 15-3 at one point, and it must have been in the third quarter, and those 3 points were all rushed. So we were at one point, 15 straight, essentially.
Wow. That's real delicious pudding.
Yeah, that is that's Kozzy like dreaming, isn't it? That's sort of just fantastic.
El Diablo 14 asks, can you discuss some of the experiments we saw on Saturday night? Did I see Clary in defensive positions, Track as resting forward, Bowie push forward, a la Brayshaw in 2022? You definitely saw. I saw Clary definitely once started at like centre half back sort of area. I'm not sure how many times he did it, so I don't know. Have you seen any? You've watched more of the replay than I just watched the highlights. So
actually, you have watched the replay, the full replay, and missed that. But I heard Clary being asked about it, and so he spent a bit of time. Where was it? Halfback flank or half forward?
Yeah, it was like halfback flank. I noticed a few times. I said, "Look, Clary's at least 1 or 2 times." I saw it.
Well, I think that jibes with the data, the stats you read out about the centre bounce attendances. So obviously, when you spread it around, you've got to put them somewhere, and they either go to the bench or another position. And
well, I think it's not so much, and now that you say it, it just clicks. I don't think it's so much an experiment in terms of Clary on half back. It was more the experimenting of other guys in the midfield, and he was just got to keep him on the field. He can't be spending 25% of time on the bench.
Yep.
Well, he can, but they obviously wanted him on the ground as well. So where do you put him? Probably in the back line.
And Track, obviously,
Track spent a lot of time up forward. 59. He was 41%, only 41% in the middle, so that's
he would have
59%.
He was 72% time on ground or something, so 30% up forward, 41%, something like that. So I mean, that was approximately what he would have been doing last year. I think he was sort of he was 60-40 sort of split last year forward. But we talked about this last week.
And he kicked 3 goals. So
he kicked 3 goals, and pretty straight kicking too.
And two of them were set shots. Yep. So and the other one was that beautiful rove off Gorney. And then Bowie pushing forward. I don't know if he's just
I didn't really
that
see
goal that he
that.
kicked. I don't think he was pushing forward. I think that just everyone was coming forward. It was party time because that was when he kicked it, and we went over 100 points.
But it's also how we play. We push up and try to, that's that whole thing about the time in forward half is you get it in there
Rivers
and you keep it in there.
well.
And if it comes out, we've got a wall to go back in. So, but also, he's on the end of it. I thought that was his best game by far this season. I was really thrilled because, I said that I've been pretty disappointed in his season thus far. I thought he had a better second half against the Tigers.
He did, yep.
But was fantastic in this whole game and back to his, really influential sort of kicking. And, he's another player who's great one-on-one for a player his size. Sparrow, Chandler and him are all terrific marks for their size. And he took, I don't know, the North Play 19, I think it was. It was a fantastic, really important mark. Otherwise, his opponent marks a much taller opponent, and he would have had a shot from 30 metres out directly in front. So he had a ripping game.
Just on Sparrow, we love midfielders that kick goals, and he always will take that mark on the 50, and you just know he's got the distance. He'll go back and kick it. Love it when he does that. Oh My D's asks, is there a time and place for handballing along the ground? Now, we did speak extensively about this last week, and I guess the best time and the place is when a player's hemmed in between the boundary. It's probably a lower risk to go forward along the ground than try to get through the players waving their hands up and down. You don't get through the legs. You might get a deflection off their legs and the ball might go out on the full and then you got a kick. But I think we've used it well so far this year. It hasn't really cost us in any situation. I noticed this week that Hunter added a new trick to his arsenal, the underground kick. It was in the first quarter, about 7 minutes into the match on the far side from the MCC side. Hunter was hard up on the boundary line, did a little shimmy, then intentionally kicks low along the ground to Kozzy, who collected it and then ran in and kicked the goal from 50. It was a really beautiful kick. It was absolutely intentional, that trickle along the ground that he did, and that was the kicking version of the underground handball.
Yeah, he missed one. So really my answer to the question is the same as last week. If it works, then keep doing it. But you're right. That one I watched all the goals as well. I went for 8 minutes, all the goals.
I love that.
That was sublime bit of play. It was also a brilliant kick from Kozzy because it was, as you say, it was probably just on 50 or just inside the 50-metre arc.
Just a step inside.
On an angle, and he just flushed it.
Yeah. Mm. Red Jacket says, loving the question and answer format of the podcast this season. Kudos to all involved. I'm starting to get the same annoying jibes from workmates that, like last year, we simply haven't beaten anyone yet and have lost games to our contenders. Are you worried about anything you've seen from the side? Does our game stack up against other teams, particularly those of Collingwood and Geelong, who look like the sides to beat? Or will we not know until Kings B-Day and our annual fun trip down the freeway to Cardinia Park? And I guess, as the saying goes, you can only beat who you play. We've had Sydney come up against Sydney, and you might say that they've dropped off, but we can't help playing Richmond when they're down, and North. B-Man, this seems like the perfect question for you. You watch a lot of non-Ds footy. How have what you've seen from the Ds stack up against what you've seen from the Pies and the Cats, or is it impossible to compare at this stage, considering who we've played, who they've played?
Well, I think it's...
And forget Geelong of the first 3 rounds, Geelong of the last 4 rounds.
I said a couple of weeks ago that a football year's resolution for me was to stop underestimating our opponents. However, and Collingwood have been brilliant. Don't get me wrong, and it must be exciting to be a fan, and come from behind and but the numbers that trend our way. If you look at some of the key stats, we're scoring more. We're they've got a system. I think this is the short version of my take, is that their system of moving the ball really quickly off the halfback flank, moving it with hands and going fast, has got a weakness to it. And the weakness for them is that it's the risk reward weakness. I think it's really fascinating. There's two philosophical camps coming up from the coaches, where you got a coach like Goody and most of the coaches really, who are defence first and then adding layers of attack on top. Whereas if you hear McRae talk, he of course acknowledges the importance of defence, but philosophically that attack is much more sort of in front of mind in the way they play. But they've struggled in the last couple of weeks. So they won on the weekend, but their scoring has dropped off, and partly because I think that their model is, as is ours, is really dependent on their fitness and their ability to cover the ground, which is why I tipped Adelaide in that game, because they were coming off a 5-day break, and they're a team that relies on their ability to run and to run out the game, which they did in the end, but they really shouldn't have been in that game. It was as much Adelaide's poor play as their good Collingwood's good play. But they struggled in that first quarter. They struggled through the game, really, and once you take their running power away from them, just as we will struggle. But, so I think Goody's experimenting with the defensive system. I heard Goody talk on 360 a couple of weeks ago after he was on there with Essendon Scott, talked about our game plan. He defaults very quickly to saying it's about defence. So that notion of us needing to keep teams to 65, which was apparently what the goal was in 21, they'll have a new number this year. Maybe it's 75, maybe it's 80, because to take into a balance, if you attack more and play more, the scores are going up. But ultimately, come finals time, the team with you need a team with a strong defence. I think that's the weakness for Collingwood, is that the risk reward stuff has got a high risk. It cost them a game against Geelong in the finals last year because they gave up crucial turnovers at crucial times, which is why they lost the game of footy. We'll come back to this through the season, but I do think we have a system that stands up. I think Goody is experimenting with different parts of it, but the big one is still the foundation is our defence, which is why I think Petty will go back there. A big challenge for our defence is that fast ball movement was in some ways brought in to counter our defensive strength, our ability to zone up, and teams couldn't get through us. So the way to beat that, as we talked about last season, is to move the ball before that defensive system can set up properly. Is to move that really quickly into it and isolate our talls and make one-on-ones and really stretch the ground and make it wide and make sure that May is one-on-one, Lever's one-on-one, Petty's one-on-one, and take away one of our strengths. And we score a lot from the back half, number one in the AFL from scoring from the back half, I think, or two. A part of that relies on our ability to zone off and get the intercept marking. We did that better on the weekend. The trick for that really against a team like Collingwood moving it so quickly is to slow them down at least a little bit in order to be able to zone off. And the other one is put huge amount of pressure on, there were questions before about the stoppages and getting it outside the stoppage. When Adelaide were putting huge amount of pressure on Collingwood, that handball to get it outside that zone was breaking down. They were really sweating on the corridor kick. The conditions were difficult, but there was pressure, and they targeted Dacos. And I just think that you've got to target Dacos to nobble them as best you can physically, and take away that kick inboard. Short version is I think we do have the system. I think it's evolving. It will change as we move. The fundamentals won't, but some of the parts will change. And I think the other thing that we've got is we've got the best list in the AFL by some margin. I know that's obviously coming from a D's fan, but assuming our system stands up, and I think it will, if we have good luck with injury and we have the things that can work for us do work for us, I'm extremely confident that our best will match anyone's best.
Bush Demon wants to know whether we think that Collingwood's 1 point win was more meritorious than Melbourne's 90-point effort, whether North should go south, and is there finally a case for Mud Island to have their own team provided that they can achieve an AFL standard field? More seriously, is the current mismatch of teams going to seriously compromise this year's final series? So I guess the fact that some teams play North, West Coast and Hawthorn twice.
Well, we play Hawthorn twice, don't we?
Well, we play Hawthorn twice, but we don't play the other two twice. But there are some teams that play some of them twice. I think, as I said, St Kilda, I think, play all three of them twice. Does that sort of, St Kilda, you look at their draw, they're finishing top four unless they really fall into a heap and really can't take it to any of the contenders. They got a very soft draw the rest of it, so they might sort of finish in that top four.
I actually do. I actually do think it's a problem. I mean, I've long thought the fixtures. It's exactly that. It's a fixture. There should be a draw. We should be playing every team once and flip it the following year. It's just ridiculous. And so, 100%. I know that the counter to this is the best teams always finish 1 to 4 and all of that, but it's just inequitable, and you will get problems. Like West Coast, you get them on the right week, they're falling in a heap. That it's gonna, if you can put on 15%, in one game, then. And another team plays them when it's wet, for instance, or doesn't play them twice, or or whatever. I think it absolutely creates potential problems. More for the teams, I reckon. In that, the counter to that is, as I said, the top 4 teams will finish top 4. Okay, let's say that's the case, but the teams who are competing for the 8th spot in the thing, they're the ones who are where it's most unfair. One of them be St Kilda, and they get to play all those teams twice, and someone like Carlton, who've got a much tougher draw than they did last year, because that they might only get half of them. That's 100%. I think there's some real problems with the equity and the way that messes with the whole competition.
Probably only get worse bringing in another team. It's a discussion for another day.
Well, unless they could, that gives them the reason why often the argument against playing all teams once and then you could do something to get your 23 games is the television rights. Bringing an extra team will offset that issue, because you've got an extra 8, is it? How many games?
Well, they're going to bring an extra team, and then there's going to be another team. So there's going to be 20 teams.
Yeah, and so then you can
play 19 games and then have the finals, I guess. But
my idea would be play each team once, and then flip the next year home and away, and then the last 4 or 5 games, then you put you do something.
I was going to say, can you then play? Can you do?
You do your
top
double
6
ups.
all play each other. Or
exactly. Yeah. Or you do your double up, so you get your derbies, your 2 derbies in, or your 3. You get your Battle of the Bridge and the Western Australian teams, and so you get your 6 big blockbuster ones, so they get their crowds and they get their TV ratings. But you play everyone once, maximise the fairness of the draw. Like make it a draw, not a bloody fixture.
All right, let's get on to Casey. Just a quick précis of Casey from Casey's report. After the disappointment of the home loss to Richmond, Casey took on Box Hill Hawks in unfamiliar bush surroundings at Wonthaggi. The trip to the country did them no harm, because at the end of the game, they were well and truly back in town, winning by 30 points and claiming their 5th win from 6 games as they sit in 2nd place on the ladder. Melksham had a day out, booting a bag of 5 goals. Joel Smith returned to the footy field and booted 3 of his own. Tom McDonald kicked 2 goals, 1 from 8 marks, and Benny Brown kicked 1 goal, 1 from 5 marks. Tomlinson, 21 disposals, and Harms, 25 disposals, featured amongst the best players. You didn't see any of that game, did you?
I saw about 10 minutes of the first quarter and the last 10 minutes of the game, and thrilled to see how well Melksham played. And Casey's comment was he was Casey's best. best on
Yeah,
ground.
I just saw one highlight where he sort of chipped it up to himself with his foot and caught it and then kicked a goal.
Yeah.
So,
The
nice highlight.
only comment I have is one of my favourite Ds. Joel Smith had a corker as well, and
A corky or a corker? 'Cause
corker.
I would believe either of those two.
Where he may have had a corky, but he had a ripping match. And here's my tip for, I reckon he's still in the frame. It'll explode people's heads, but he's still in the frame for a forward spot, I reckon. And I've long thought that's his spot where he can be chaotic. He's got a huge leap on him. He's an accurate kick for goal, and he's quick and athletic, which is, suits the game that we play, but also, Goody obviously has a lot of time for him. He could be an option. It could be one of the things that, he can play tall. So Smith could play as one of the two talls that Goody, the three tall setup that Goody's talks about, resting ruck being one of those three talls. So he could be one of them, which would replace T-Mac, for instance, or Benny Brown in the team.
You can also play him in a practice match on half a leg and play him injured.
That's funny.
Remember that? Fun times.
He kicked 5 goals that day.
He did last two on stumps.
Yeah.
Training report. We don't often get these, but before we get into the changes portion of the show, we have a training report for one of our track watchers, Kev Martin. Kev is a regular down at training during the pre-season, and he's often providing the Monday training report during the season. He noted the following from this morning's session: 17 in the main squad, 4 in the light duties, which were Hibbo, McVee, Fritsch and JVR. 2 in the rehab, Chandler and Varel, and Kai Turner doing his own program. Kai Turner mentioned in interview with Robbo pre-game that he's got some hip injury or something, groin/hip. A morning game of soccer after some running. Those who played for Casey weren't there. Shaki has damaged a right wrist. He had a large black support on it. Came on the field late, only marking with his left hand, doing some work and kicking with a personal trainer. So that might answer the question. I don't think if he's got a wrist guard on, he might not be playing this week. Kev said they're looking sharp. They're into longer runs. Chandler has stepped aside. He also noted that Petty wasn't training as a result of still effectively being in concussion protocols. So I think the word with Petty is that he only comes out of concussion protocols later in the week. So, yeah, that's Shaki news. Doesn't sound great for him if he's done something to his wrist.
If he can only use one arm, he's almost armless.
There you go. Let's get into changes. Spargo is out of concussion protocols. Petty may be out of concussion protocol. I've got concussion protocols by match day. Shaki has some type of wrist support. Hibbo came off late in the match for harms. Chandler was in rehab. Melksham is fresh off 5 goals. Presumably Brown and T-Mac are available, but does their Casey form warrant a call-up? Borgzilla says, love the fast-moving game we are playing, as well as the control we are showing under pressure. Will there be changes to the main squad this week? I'm a little worried about Harms. Did not get a lot of time on the field, but what I saw, he was not quite 100%, but then played a good game for Casey the next day. Great potty, guys. Keep up the great work. Mandalorian says, another quality podcast last week, guys, with Petty and Spargo presumably out of concussion protocols. T-Mac and Big Benny Brown another week at Casey under their belts. Melksham kicking a bag of goals. Who would want to be a selector? Big man, who's coming in and who's going out based on all of that information that I've just dumped on you?
It's interesting. Let's say there's no resting of players. My gut feeling is that they will manage some players, and maybe Hibbo. I'm not quite sure whether he came up. But let's say everyone's fit and they don't manage anyone. I think Shaki will come out, and probably if he's got a sore wrist, that might be a moot point. I think Shaki will come out. Petty will come in for him, not necessarily playing the same role, and I think Spargo comes straight back in. And I think I have no doubt he'll come straight back in. Who comes out for him? I think Harms will come out and Jordan will go back to the sub. Melksham's game is an interesting one because that's a fantastic performance. He finishes his work. He's highly skilled, so it would be pretty tough on JJ. But there's a chance that JJ may get dropped and Melksham might come in for him with best on ground. Maybe they'll reward that, but. I think Shaki comes out, Petty comes in, Spargo comes in, and Harms gets dropped, Jordan to the bench. But I think that there's a good chance Hibbo won't travel.
There's a possibility as well that the managing is also being done at training because there were a few players that were on light duties, Hibbo, McVie, Fritsch, JVR. So the Fritsch we know with his foot, there may be the managing him during the week. I remember once we did an interview with Vandenberg and he used to, I don't think, train because of his foot injuries, not train much during the week, but still play. So Fritsch, maybe they're doing a similar thing with him while they're getting his foot right. McVie and JVR might be, maybe they're being managed a bit during the week as opposed to giving them rest during games. So I don't know. I'm just spitballing here. But the thing about Melksham, go ahead.
So the interesting thing though is that I don't know what you think. Do you think Brown or T-Mac will come back in?
Well, that's why I asked. I didn't ask. Someone asked if their form warrants it. It doesn't look like their form warrants it. Someone said something that Ben Brown looked a bit sore. So I haven't seen a minute of that game, so I can't talk to that. But it's interesting. He's played 2 weeks in the twos now. He's presumably been. He was ready to be selected against Essendon. That's in the gather round. We've played Essendon, we've played Richmond, we've played North. So that's 3 weeks that he was back ready for.
Brown, you mean?
And then Brown.
Yeah. My feeling is that they're both they're gonna stay at VFL level for a little while, and they'll just keep experimenting with this forward line setup, and get through this period. That's my gut feeling. Is both of them are coming off injuries. Interestingly, Goody talked a couple of weeks ago when asked about T-Mac. He referenced, apropos of wasn't directly related to the question, that he's 13 weeks off last year because of his injury. And so from that, I'm sort of feeling like they're looking to get both of them cherry ripe and using this period. And they've done that before, haven't they? They've done it with Brown before. They've done it with Wiedemann. And they've done it to a lesser degree with T-Mac in 2020 at the beginning of that season, where he was they gave him a sharpen up in the middle of the season. So I wonder whether they're holding off. One of them will come back in ultimately, but maybe they're holding off doing that to provide some run and to these other players. The travel, the humidity, it would make sense to not play them this week and even look to wait to the bye and bring them in after the bye.
All right. The preview versus the Suns. After losses in their first 2 matches, the Suns shocked the footy world, defeating the reigning premiers by 3 goals. They then lost the next 2 matches before getting back on the winners list for the following 2 matches. They have a win-loss record of 3 wins, 4 defeats, but have been competitive for either a half or 3/4 of all the matches that they've lost. Singer says, I think there is a feeling that we will just rock up and roll the Suns, but I think this could be a danger game if we don't come switched on to play. The Suns have taken it right up to a few teams and have fallen away in the last quarter. Miller is a massive out for them, but we should not take them too lightly. What do you guys think we need to do to bank the 4 points? B-Man, how close have you been watching the Suns this season, and is this a danger game for the Ds? You're on mute.
Yeah, I think it is. I think that a couple of things is it won't be quite, the weather won't be as humid as it can be at night up there, and the weather's not too bad, but it's a 4:30 kickoff.
4:30. It's 23 degrees and sunny up there.
The humidity won't be like it will be at Brisbane.
Preceding and after, so yeah.
Yeah, and it's where it's at Metricon.
Metricon. So it's called Heritage Bank Stadium these days.
So it hasn't got the peculiar hard surface in the middle that the Gabba does, which apparently a lot of players struggle with because the bounce is different and it's also rock hard. Like it's so it hasn't got those factors at work. But they are a team that very much are a contest based team. So we our measure of success is winning contested ball and the time in forward half. They are very much a time in forward half and contested ball team. They're ranked third in kicks per game, fifth in marks per game, which I thought was interesting, fifth in tackles. They're second in clearances per game, so they're right up there in clearances. They rebound, fourth in rebound from the back half, from the rebound 50s, and they're second in team to opponent clearances per game differential. So, that some of their numbers are similar to what we look to, in particular the contested ball. What was Took Miller's? I didn't actually catch what the prognosis for him was.
He's had his knee, MCL.
It wasn't a
meniscus. It's.
Well, I'm pleased it wasn't longer
out.
because so like he's a huge out, and just
he's 4 to 6
running he does. So there, I think there is a challenge. They'll knock off some teams. I've been a bit disappointed with them this year, to be honest. I thought they would take another step, but they're very
They took Essendon quite far in that game against them. They've been up there with teams.
Yeah. So I think that apart from probably to be honest, apart from West Coast and North Melbourne, if every other team, if we don't bring our elite pressure and the opposition bring their very best pressure, particular teams like Carlton, for instance, are a really good contested ball team, and a team like the Suns, who Dew has based his whole game plan almost around that contest, and I think that it is a danger game. Travel is always a bit of a challenge. I'd agree with that. It's a bit of let's assume we bring it. If we bring our heat, then we'll win this game. They've got one less day. So they played on the Sunday, we played on the Saturday night, offset a little by the fact that we're travelling. I think that it certainly won't be a game that they won't be taking it comfortably. And I agree totally with the comment that it's a danger game.
All right. I think we'll leave it there for the night. We'll be back next week at the normal time of Monday night at 8:30 p.m. live next week from the Gold Coast. We'll be up there, and I have to stay up there for work for a couple of days. If you want to listen to the show live, then please join us at demonland.com on Monday at 8:30 p.m. Thank you to our 5-star reviewers, Fogman and Jono. Thank you to our voicemailer, Noah from Bentley. Thank you to our caller, George on the outer. How can we forget him? Thank you to our Demonland posters who submitted questions and comments. Thank you to D Old Fart, Delightful Play, D Minion, Pew Pew Pew, Dr. Gonzo, DJ R, Red and Blue Makes Purple, Bigfoot, Kiwi D, Lazy, Lefty, El Diablo 14, Oh My D's, Red Jacket, Bush Demon, Kev Martin for his training report, Borgzilla, Mandalorian, and Singer. Thank you to my co-host, Bim Man. And thank you to you, our loyal listeners. Don't forget, leave us a 5-star review and comment on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts, and we'll read it out on the next podcast. See you next week. Go Demons.
Go Leggers.